Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Moxtober daily recap. For those of you who don't know what Moxtober is, it's an annual event where on each day of the month of October there's a different prompt, and whatever that one word prompt inspires in people, they make some sort of magic related creative pursuit related to it. Most people make custom magic cards, so that's what we're going to be reviewing today. But people also write articles, make decks, do art, and basically anything creative. On today's episode, we have Ancestral of MTG Design and Gateways, a member of the MSC community, joining me on the mic. And a reminder, as always, you can find all of the cards we talked about linked in the description, as well as instructions for how you two can potentially get your cards into the pool for cards we discuss for these episodes. But yeah, I think with that, we can start off. And I'm going to start us off today with a card from MTG Design. It's going to be Repressed Nightmare. So let me scroll over to it. This is 2 black and a blue for a creature Nightmare Illusion, and when it enters the battlefield, you get to Mind Rot an opponent. And whenever it attacks, it becomes a copy of target creature card in defending player's graveyard until end of turn. So I think that this is kind of a perfect package as a whole, where it's like mechanically it enables itself in a pretty cool way, where it's like naturally by discarding you're going to get stuff into your graveyard, and the flavor of like it's like you have someone who's obviously in a padded cell, so there's this kind of like loss of mind here, and madness is represented by discarding cards in Magic, so the flavor comes together there. And yeah, it just feels like a really cool card, both mechanically and flavorfully. I don't think it's a constructed level card, but I can definitely see limited environments where you just run this out, and you can obviously we've seen things where like environments where putting cards into your opponent's graveyard is good, like the Dimmer Mill in ZNR. So can easily see a repeat of that archetype that uses something like this.
Sort of reminds me of Zareth, Sam, the trickster from Zendikar Rising, where you have the rogue that comes in, and then you get to mess with that player's graveyard. And this has this kind of design. Obviously, you're not permanently stealing it. It's an illusion. It turns into that thing for a little bit, and I think that's kind of like a good trade off because literally every time you attack, you kind of want to attack with this thing. It gets to be kind of the dirtiest, foulest, scariest thing in that graveyard. So I like it from that design, and I think honestly, Mind Rot in any creature is like Mind Rot plus a creature for 4 mana. That's really strong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that honestly, I think you're giving it a little undercrediting a little because I think Mind Rot just with 1 extra mana, plus a 1/3 body, as well as that pretty crazy activated ability against many decks, definitely isn't not going to be a player in like a standard level environment. Definitely not something that's going to see play in the MSC equivalent or MSCM equivalent, but still, I think pretty powerful in its own right.
That's fair. And like, one thing that came up, I don't remember why I thought of this when Ancestral was talking, is that I think it's a cool thing that, oh yeah, that it changes back, because it only copies it until end of turn. You can't do, because the thing is, usually the shenanigans that prevents you from just copying an opponent's hexproof creature is the fact that it has hexproof. Here, if you could just make it a copy of an opponent's hexproof creature and then wait until you mill out their big like 7/7 finisher and then just kill them that way, it would definitely feel kind of whack. But the fact that it transforms on end means that they still have a good level of like interactivity, even if you can like fog it for a combat step or something. But yeah.
Yeah, I also think I just want to say I think the on the last ability having it be a temporary change is something that it's good for mechanics, like you said. Also, I think really good for the flavor of the card in presenting it more as like a illusion temporary sort of thing that fits in the nightmare theme.
Yeah, like when you wake up during the day, it's just kind of chilling as a 1/3, but at night, its true form or whatever your greatest fear is comes out to play. Okay, so who wants to go next?
I can talk about a card. That last card, by the way, was tag 003. So thank you for the submission. The next card I've got is also on MTG Design. This is Abyssal Tutor. 3 black black. It's a sorcery at uncommon. Search your library for a card, put it in your hand, shuffle, and it's got madness 1 and a black. And it's kind of funny because there are a few cards out there. I mean, cycling is kind of like the original, the OG sort of replacement card. Take the thing I have, draw a card in replacement. Obviously, we've got like transmute, which sort of does it for a specific mana value. And what was the other one I was thinking of? Like land grant. So like you can have the land grant in your opening hand be a different basic land, but this is literally just I can turn this card into another card, and I think it's kind of fun to sort of harken back to the original like tutor that started it all, which is demonic tutor. So finding a kind of a clever way to get that 2 mana cost. Obviously, demonic tutor is quite overpowered, and it's what we would never see that printed in a standard environment. So I think this is kind of a clever way to be able to get that. Sort of reminds me of like miracles, but with madness here. Discard the card, and you can turn it into any other card in your deck.
Yeah, and I think like again, I'm very certain that the one black cost like riff on demonic tutor is intentional, um, and I like the flavor of like yeah, it's just like it's overall like a very functional card. It's a card that I could uh, easily see printed, even with like there's definitely some crazy synergies where you go like turn one discard outlet, turn two this, and then tutor for anything. But then like you're playing a one mana discard outlet, which probably isn't great unless you're like a
You
full on madness deck. So
you still need right. You still need 2 mana to be able
yeah,
to
I'm
cast it.
saying like free discard outlet, and
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure, for sure.
um, and yeah, it's just again this feels like a really functional card in a way I can appreciate.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's super clean. It's super well done. There's really nothing bad I can say about this card. Only issues may be power level, but like what you said, you need a lot of discard outlet turn one, so you need to build your deck around it. And if you're building your deck around it, it's going to be harder to get value out of that tutor because you're tutoring for a piece. But if you're already having like the setup to create cards, it's going to be you're not going to get as good of a start.
Okay, so gateways. What is going to be your first card?
The first card I wanted to look at was a design by Cajun, My Little Nightmare from the MSE file. My Little Nightmare is a nightmare dog. It's a 2/3 for 2 and a white, and it has lifelink. And when it enters the battlefield, you gain 5 life, and when it dies, you lose 5 life. I think it's a really neat design, calling back to an old design from Magic's history, Delusions of Mediocrity, which is a 3 and a blue enchantment that does the same thing, but instead of 5 life, it's 10 life. That card was featured in all sorts of fun combo decks that were doing harmless offerings and that sort of thing. And I think adapting that for the modern era of design by turning it into a smaller creature with fine power and toughness that's still going to do work outside of that ability, but still has that value that you can have really fun build around moments with it is really cool.
Yeah, and I think that it's also interesting just like the fact that it's a dice trigger and not leaves the battlefield trigger because I think I remember like some of the ones that used to be used in tricks, the donate combo decks were like leave the battlefield stuff. So here you can even like you can flicker this and then keep gaining 5 life and actually using that, which is kind of crazy. So and like this really stymies aggressively oriented decks. It like despite just being a 2/3 with lifelink, the fact that it gains 5 life on ETB is just so huge because all of a sudden you've you've stifled almost 2.5 bolts. Um, and sure, they can bolt it to kill it, and if they just bolt it to kill it, well, then it saved you 1 bolt's worth of value. If you get to start to chip in or like flicker this some way, you can just completely shut down aggressive decks. And yeah, I love the flavor. I think it's just, it's as Cajun said. I think that Nightmare in general, people are doing very depressing, edgy things. Um, and while the flavor text is a little bit sad, I think that overall the idea of this is very bright and cute. So I appreciate that. But yeah, do you have anything to say about this ancestral? If not, I can move
Uh,
on to my next card.
yeah. No, I like the artwork. I think the artwork is really nice. Um, it reminds me of there was a cycle of cards from I think it was one of the Kamigawa sets where like when it died, um,
The Show, the Night Star, and that and all of that.
yeah, that's one it reminds me of. Um, so this is kind of a. It also sort of reminds me of like Illusions of Grandeur, where you gain 20 life and then when you lose it, you lose 20 life. In this case, though, yeah, no, in this case, it's obviously a lot smaller, and the lifelink helps you kind of prepare for that. So, no, I think it is, I think it's cute, and I think that the right decks can really take advantage of the life gain, life loss.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So next up, my next card is from MTG Design. It's going to be Sudden Awakening. So let's swoop over there. Um, oh, there it is. Whoops. So pretty simple, common. A blue and a black instant, untap target creature. It gets +2/-2 until end of turn. I feel like this is a fantastic, flexible removal spell slash combat trick because the +2/-2, obviously you can just kind of use it as a disfigure, whatever. I even think that the art may be like canon art, like it might be canon. I think it's like canon Innistrad art or something. Um, but yeah, you can do like disfigure style stuff with it, but you can also just like completely get an opponent with the untap, um, and either go for a trade or for just a whole winning the block here. It's just a really functional combat trick, and on top of being super functional, I think the flavor is fantastic. You untap it, which represents it's waking up. It's no longer exhausted. It gets -2 because it's still tired and is like weak, but it gets +2 because there's like that adrenaline of like, whoa, I've just woken up. What's going on? So, yeah, I'm a big fan. It reminds me a lot of. I know that there's quite a few Rakdos removal spells that kind of do +2 - something. So I love the idea of not exactly shifting it, but exploring that similar type of space in blue black.
The
Yeah,
flavor here is really nice. Kaokun made another good card here. She woke with a start, couldn't shake the memory of her nightmare for several hours. So that I think that really kind of describes what happens. You wake up, you untap. You know what I mean? It literally like you're 90 degrees. More vertical. So it's just like tapping or untapping a creature. I think that's pretty clever. The blue black, if anything, it's not over. Well, it's not undercosted. I don't know if probably as a removal spell it's okay, and yeah, you could certainly use it on your own things in the right manner. I think if anything, probably you'd use it on your own creature to do a surprise block. That's probably how I would end up using this card. But yeah, it's good design.
yeah, I really enjoy it. Something that a lot of like my favorite part about custom design is seeing people do really flavorful things in a really simplistic way and like finding an easy answer that still represents something flavorfully. And I think this is like a perfect example of that kind of thing in action. You because you have all those flavor elements, but like when you look at the card itself, it's really just like a combat trick that can also kill things sometimes. and it's really simple to understand to grok, but you still have a really great flavor there. And also, just you earlier mentioned that this is an Innistrad art. It is Death's Caress, which is a common from the original Innistrad set. But yeah, I think it's great.
Okay. Ancestral, what's your next card?
So speaking of two mana spells, two mana, two color spells. There's a card on MTG Design called Invite into Nightmare. White and a black sorcery. Exile a creature, then choose two. You lose life equal to the creature's mana value. The creature's controller draws a card, or the creature's controller gains life equal to its mana value. I kind of like the idea here of being able to have a strong effect on such a small costed spell, and then you're kind of choosing the drawbacks essentially. And choosing two, it's sort of like picking 2 or 3 poisons, right? This kind of reminds me of a few different cards, like there was a Vendetta. Vendetta is a kind of an older Magic card where for a single black mana you could destroy a creature and then you lose life. And also there was a card more recently from Strixhaven where you exile it and then if you pay the lesson cost, which was 2 mana, then your opponent draws a card. So I kind of like how I think this is all fairly balanced, and I kind of like that. Why not be able to choose the bad things? You know what I mean? We're so often we're given a card and it has the bad things, so now you get to choose which nightmares you'd like to witness.
Yeah, for sure. This card was also on my list, and actually, one thing is I love the design, but I honestly think it could be pushed to instant, just because like you're already a 2 color removal spell,
Sure.
and you have to get like you have to like downside yourself twice. I think that like if there's a way you could push it a little bit more, I wouldn't like even I could even see maybe I'm crazy for this, but I could see instant speed choose one or sorcery speed choose one maybe. But I definitely think that like going to choose one or going to instant speed are both like knobs I could see turning on this to make it a little bit more have a little bit more punch. But yeah, I had this
Mm-hmm.
on my list because yeah, I agree. I love the overall concept. I love how these are a bunch of removal drawbacks that we've seen across these colors, and just collating them into one, into a pick your poison style thing, just feels like a natural next step. So yeah, big fan.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think this does a really great job at marrying the sort of white kill spell with downside and black deal with the devil elements. And I think it does a really good job at combining those two elements and making a pretty polished card. One note I do have is that I don't know if draws a card is ever going to be chosen unless you're about to win the game. But overall, I think that it's a solid design, and I think even I do also agree it could probably be pushed to choose one, so that you're not forcing the lose life gain life every time. But I think it's a really great design.
Azathoth, thank you for the nicely designed card there.
Okay, so gateways. What's your next card?
Okay, so I'm going to be looking at another MTG Design card. We're going to be looking at Debilitating Nightmare. So, Debilitating Nightmare is a design by I don't know if I can pronounce this. Noitesouieu.
Noitesouieu. Yeah,
Noitesouieu.
it's up on the screen, so it's all good.
Yeah, all right, you can see it. Okay, so it's a 1 black enchantment aura curse with enchant player. When it enters the battlefield, if it's neither day or night, it becomes night. If it's night, enchanted player can't win the game. While I doubt this should be an uncommon. I think at rare this is a super flavorful design. I think that putting using this day night cycle in a really unprecedented way as a platinum angel sort of effect is really awesome. And although I think there is an issue with it in regards to like other opponents losing the game, causing a win. I don't know exactly how the core of like the minutia of the rules would work. I think the effect here is really solid, and I think it's super flavorful in terms of nighttime being just an auto fail, and you having to get through the hoop of not casting spells for a turn, making a day, or casting 2 spells in a turn to make a day, and getting the kill there. So I think it's a really cool design.
Mm-hmm. Well, back-to-back designs that are also on my list. I think the way that would work is, well, you can't, like, unless there's some other fuckery going on, you will have to at least kill the player who put debilitating nightmares on you to be able to win the game or to be the only player in the game. And at that point, isn't it that all objects that a player controls leaves the game once they lose? So debilitating nightmares will leave, and so you can still win.
So if you're
Right.
playing a
Okay.
one versus one, and the player that puts this on you, if you are able to kill them, then you can still win.
Yep, yep.
So it would probably need a rework to make it function within the rules, but like
And honestly, I think
conceptually it's really sick.
even as is in a multiplayer game, I think it's still strong. But yeah, I think that the it's clever, and like you said, it kind of evokes that Platinum Angel sort of feeling to it.
Okay. And I guess with that, going to be moving over to the MSC, where we're going to do Remember War, which is listed as designed by Moon Hollow. Um, and this is 3 white, destroy all creatures. Then, if you're in a nightmare, create 2/1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying. And what does being in a nightmare mean? You're in a nightmare if 2 or more cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere this turn. So I like this a lot because I feel like there's lots of ways to trigger being in a nightmare. Obviously, you discard cards, you mill cards, you sacrifice stuff. So I think that usually one thing with one-off keywords is the worry that they're super narrow or that they only function for that card. Not so for Nightmare. Nightmare has huge design space. And then what I love about this specific design is usually you're running wipes and control, and wipes are already very strong cards, so putting like upsides on them can be dangerous. Here, though, you only get the upside if you also either usually the main way you're going to be triggering Nightmare is that the like creatures that you control were put into a graveyard. Um, so you have to be running creatures yourself, or you need other synergy with stuff that allows you to like surveil or like allows you to discard cards, free sack outlets, stuff like that. So I think that it feels super balanced and it makes me excited for a mechanic as a whole from a single card. So yeah, big fan.
I
Dude.
like that. I was going to say I like that when you're. I haven't been to war. I haven't fought in a battle, but I can only imagine that. When people have, right, it's not everyone survives, and the people around you, the your compatriots, right? You remember them, and this is sort of, you get these spirits. So the spirits are like them living on, right? They're not forgotten. Um, the flavor text here is kind of eerie, right? They fell, I survived. Why me? It's almost being tortured that I didn't also fall in battle, or why was I left behind? And kind of gets into some heavy stuff there. But I like the fact that some of the legacies of these fallen soldiers are still around you.
Mm-hmm. Gateways, do you have anything to say before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I just want to echo what you said about Nightmare. Looking at keyword design is something or one-off keyword design is something that I'm interested in. I've had projects that kind of dabble in a similar space, and I think Nightmare here is a really good use of one. I think that it's, you have flavor there in just in the name. You have a really concise mechanical effect that has lots of different ways to be triggered. meaning that you can build in all kinds of different ways around it with a mill deck, a discard deck, a creature-based deck that you're going to be sacking creatures with. Even like I like how this is broad enough where you can just play like 2 shock fetches or something and cast a Remember War off of those, or or just do something like at the beginning of your upkeep, discard a card or 2 and then cast a Remember War and get the bonus. Like it's just a really cool design because there's so many ways that you can do it outside of the answer that the card gives you on its head.
Yep. So once again, thanks to Moonhollow124 for designing this card. Next up, what's your card, Ancestral?
All right. We're going to look at a card from MTG Design. And this is Born of Nightmares. So 2 and a black for a sorcery. Each player mills 2, then each player puts a creature card from their graveyard onto the battlefield. I don't pretend to believe that this is exactly balanced, but I think that this is going to be a really fun card in a multiplayer setting. Really reminds me of Unearth, which is a single black mana. You return a small creature to the battlefield, and I feel like there is a card out there that
It's
says
Exhume.
like each
It's Exhume.
Exhume. That's what I'm thinking of. Unearth, Exhume. So Exhume is 1 and a black, and each player does this. So in this case, you get the mill, which is kind of critical here. And maybe that tries to make it a little bit more balanced because everybody can kind of try to get a better creature in there. But Born of Nightmares, right? Taking the things from the graveyard and putting them on the battlefield, it's scary. So I think it works.
Yeah, it's simple and effective.
You go.
I mean, I that was literally all I had to say.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think this is a really sick card. I definitely agree with what you said about that. Mill 2 does a lot of work here at making it more quote unquote balanced. And I think this is really cool as like a meta pick against decks that are, more spell based as like a punisher for those kinds of things, saying you don't get any value from this. Although absolutely this is going to be used unfairly most of the time, and for the average environment, it might not be the healthiest. I think that it does a really good job at doing what is there, and I think like if this was just 3 and a black, it'd be a really excellent design.
Okay, so what's going to be your next card, Gateways?
Yeah, so the card we're going to be looking at is in the MSE file, and it's a card by my friend Emily. We're looking at Utite Elidia the Fourth Ascendant. Utite Elidia is actually a character who originated in the MSE Survivor. If you haven't heard of that, it's basically a game show that we ran on the Discord, similar to like Project Runware, where people did design competitions every week and were eliminated. And this was from like one of the very early rounds of that show, the character. And Utite Elidia, she won her round. People were really impressed with that original design of like a death-themed world, and with her as kind of the headpiece of that. And this Planeswalker takes that theme of death and a more morbid world and really runs with it. I think that this is an excellent design as a big control Planeswalker finisher, because I think there are just a lot of moving pieces here that make it interesting. So with the first ability, the passive, you have the ability to draw cards and put loyalty counters, not just from her own abilities, but also from just creatures dying naturally on the board. And that gives you a lot of power in terms of like just having combats that accrue you a ton of value. And then the minus X is where the most interesting ability of the Planeswalker to me, because in conjunction with the first ability, it's basically saying you can do 3 different things with it. You can make yourself sacrifice some of your own creatures in order to trade them in for drawing cards, or you can make you and your opponent both make that sacrifice, drawing a card for not just drawing a card for your own, but also killing some of your opponent's creatures, and then also just having the mode of being able to nuke your opponent's board. I think it's a really pairing that with the fact that it's an X ability, meaning that you can scale the amount that you want to do it. It's a really tricky ability just in terms of figuring out how much damage you can do and what's the optimal way to use it. And I think that's really fun. And then the -6, of course, is kind of the payoff of that Planeswalker. And if you're able to get to the -6 the turn after you play it, you're in a really, really good position because you can just start sacrificing your own creatures, getting copies of them, sacrificing those, and accruing a ton of value. And so I think it's really cool as a control finisher at 7 mana and has a lot of unique design elements.
Yeah, and one thing I was thinking is I think it's the dynamic is interesting because usually when you're playing creatures in a planeswalker deck, because I actually kind of disagree about. I guess it can be a control finisher, but I think lots of times you like this in like a rampy mid range. Um, but I like the dynamic of usually when you're running creatures in a deck that's playing planeswalkers, it's for the protect me, provide a blocker for opponents' things that would otherwise kill me. Here it's the complete opposite dynamic, where instead of the creature serving the planeswalkers kind of being needing to be protected from the needing serving as protection from the for the planeswalker. Here they're like resources where it's like, ah, yes, I'm just gonna gobble gobble gobble, trade you in for cards. Um, so that's kind of a cool play mechanics as flavor slash play dynamic that I like. Um, I wish there was space for a third ability. I wish there was like a little more play here because it kind of feels like you either play this and then have a free sack outlet so you can insta alt, and usually probably win the game from there, or you just -X to your opponent's board. So I kind of like one of my favorite elements of Planeswalkers is having that kind of choice element, and I think that this doesn't give that to me as much as I would want. So that's my nitpick or gripe with the card.
Yeah, this reminds me of Liliana Dreadhorde General because it's very similar. Uh, Liliana, I think, is 1 mana less. She starts with 2 more loyalty, draws cards when a creature you control dies, and has a minus ability where you can sack creatures. Each player sacrifices creatures. Um, this, I think, is probably even stronger, though, because it's 7 mana. You get loyalty counters for each creature that dies. You can choose any number of target players, so you don't even have to target yourself. And honestly, like I could totally see a situation where if you had a sack outlet, which maybe not in most limited environments, we'll get just kind of like a free sack creature. Although um, we did have a few recently. But I mean, you could ultimate like the turn after you cast this planeswalker. Like that is absolutely a thing. And I think if you sack a creature and create a token, this is just bonkers. Like this is an incredibly bonkers card. Um, I would be extremely afraid to play against this.
Would you say that it would be a nightmare? But
It would
I'm actually
it
leaving the
would be a
topic of
nightmare. I
go.
think it's a little too strong. I think if you took the loyalty counterpart out of it, maybe it's okay. I think the -X is also a little bit too strong too. Um, but it's hard to say. Maybe it's okay.
yeah, my thing is
But
that it has no
yeah,
way of gaining loyalty unless without the static, and also
sure.
while the -X is strong, I think the main thing is like this is coming down turn 7, at which point, and your opponent probably has already amassed like a large board. Uh, they either should have already killed you by that point, or if they, or like they probably are just mounting. They probably don't have like creatures as their finishers. They're probably in another slow deck and running enchantments or planeswalkers or a combination thereof.
Mhm.
And I think that also the fact that it's not, if it was destroy any number of X creatures, I think it would be a lot scarier. Here you can like mitigate it fairly easily with tokens, and then just be like, cool, I'm gonna poke you down to death. I also think the deck building restriction, quote unquote, of like you need to be running like you need to be running creatures. You're preferably running creatures that are either sack helots or sack themselves, and usually aristocrats does not want to go up to 7 mana. I think there's like a little more play here, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think one thing to note is that it's just super dead on an empty board. Like if your opponent board wipes the turn before you play this, it's just doing absolutely nothing. Like sure, you can maybe minus it to make them sacrifice creatures as they start playing them, but at that point in the game, it's more conditional. So if you have it and your board's set up and you're already in a win more position, it's going to be great. But it's not going to be as good as if you're in a losing position to begin with.
Yeah, I think I would just like focus on myself. Or I would like just cast a board wipe or attack with all my creatures, like put this on the board, attack with all my creatures, second main, assuming some of them died. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's something here because we've been talking about this for a while. So yeah, it is a pretty neat design.
TM. But yeah, okay. My next card. So Nightmare, in both popular culture and also in MTG, uh, is not only just like a concept, but there's also this idea of the Nightmare, which is like a horse that does scary stuff. And I believe that there is an old card, we talked about this yesterday, 5 and a
Mm-hmm.
black, power and toughness equal to the number of swamps you control. Um, and we saw Daydream, which was one riff on that. We're going to see some others today, but the first one is going to be Corrupting Nightmare from the MSE file, designed by BoofTroupe. And this card is just, I love it. I love it a lot for many reasons. I think flavorfully, um, it, just like having this be an enchantment creature is like so much fun, just because like how that plays it, how that just ties into it flavorfully. Um, and obviously, it's got the good old power and toughness are each equal to the number of swamps you control line. But it also has Bestow. Enchant creature gets minus X, where X is the number of swamps you control for 7 mana. And there are definitely a few Bestow designs that encouraged you to put them on opponent's creatures. There was like one that you control enchanted creature, if I remember right. Um, but I think that if I remember right, there's like a good number of like minus X like removal spells in general in Theros. Like for the most recent one, I remember like there's a Catobilipus Blight Breath or something, which is the big 6 drop finisher. There's obviously Mire's Grasp. Um, so just this just feels like a very like, oh yeah, duh card that I would also be super excited to play with because you can either use it as uh, a big beater in the early game, or if you get into the late game and you top deck it and they have a bomb, you're like bombant and just kill it. So yeah, I'm just a. This is maybe my favorite design submitted today, uh, and that's really saying something because there were some bangers.
Yeah, I think this design is awesome. I think my favorite part about it is how usually this always comes down as a creature. It's basically just a kicker destroy target creature or to give minus X to something because of the fact that bestow works the way it does, and that once it annihilates the creature, it just comes down right onto the battlefield. So I think it takes bestow that's usually something that's more has a different style of play to it, and it changes the dynamic of how bestow works and turns it into basically like a kicker. Turn this into a chupacabra.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's a creature. It is kind of like a chupacabra. I guess the kind of the ironic thing is it's in reverse order. Basically, it kills the thing and then you get the creature. Um, and I think having an X equal number of swamps. This probably isn't a common. I mean, I think that's this would be like a higher rarity. It would have to
Yeah,
be, but
I'd assume this is like a case of default rarity TM.
it could be. And a lot of these people that are making cool cards like this is designed in a cube or something where rarity doesn't matter. So obviously, we need to take that with a big grain of salt. But um, I like the art there with the with the horse, and I really do have a fond memories of the original Nightmare, and this is definitely like an homage to that.
Okay, Ancestral, what's your next card?
Okay. So we're gonna take a look at. So we'll look at Horrific Howl. This is in MSE, the MSE file, designed by Kafkaesque. It's 1 blue-black for an enchantment. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Then if that player is your opponent, they discard a card at random. So this is trying to be like a Howling Mine, except that if it's not you, then they have to discard something. And discarding at random, there's a very nightmarish feel to that, I think. Obviously, it like if you're the player that has to discard at random, it feels horrible, right? I mean, and if you have a large hand, it's like, okay, well, I can take a risk here. It's it's the gamble card. Gamble is like that red spell where you have to discard a card at random. If you're not the opponent, I think you're just happy that they have to discard something they can't choose. But either way, when you discard the thing you don't want to discard, it never feels good. And there's sort of a trade-off of you get a thing, you lose something, but you might be losing more than you want. So it's the horrific howl, the howl. I'm sure that's an echo to Howling Mine, and I know that Mark Rosewater had said that certainly if Howling Mine was being designed today, it would absolutely be a blue card. It probably would be an enchantment. So this is sort of a way of recreating that and adding a very black element into it.
Yeah, I think it feels like a very simple card. I'm not sure about the play patterns of this, like you mentioned, but it's one of those things where, like, I would definitely say worth testing, ship this and see how it plays. Yeah,
Might be a little undercosted, but
yeah,
I hear
Yeah.
you.
yeah.
Yeah, looking at something like Kumena's Awakening, that kind of effect is usually at 2 blue with like a downside there. So maybe see this at like 2 blue-black. But overall, I think it's really cool. I'm a big proponent of random discard. I very much enjoy it. So this card is right up my wheelhouse, and I think it does a really good job of doing combining the meta elements of flavor, like you said with Howling Mine, and just having a neat play style in terms of giving you card advantage, giving your opponent a more randomized hand. It kind of fits into the whole um, nightmare theme.
Okay, Gateways, what's your next card?
Okay, so about 2 cards ago, we had a lot of conversation about the card Nightmare, the old Magic card that was the horse that 5 and a black that had power equal toughness equal to your swamps. This round, we had a really great riff on that, and I think I want to call that out as one of my cards. So in the MSE file, we have a card named Fightmare, designed by Asterd with a B, also with the username on Reddit, WowI. Fightmare is a riff on a Nightmare. It's 5 and a red for a star. Power and toughness equal to the number of mountains you control, and when it enters the battlefield, it fights target creature. Um, I think this is a really, I think this is the one of the funnier designs that was shown uh, in the whole entry that I've seen. I think it does a really good job at taking the name of our prompt and taking it to something that people wouldn't expect. Instead of talking about nightmares, it talks about the specific card Nightmare and does a riff on that. And I think that the card itself is well balanced because you lose out on the evasion of Nightmare to end games, and you trade it back for it being able to kill something on Enter the Battlefield, depending on how you're playing. Overall, I think it's a really cool design and a really fun riff on that old card.
Yeah, I'm a fan. In fact, this was going to be my next card for The exact same reasons of like, well, now that we've talked about Nightmare, but yeah, it's so simple. The change of flying keyword to the fight makes so much sense with the name. The thunder of its hooves beat you into despair. Yeah, this is over. This is another card which I could easily see them printing in like a Modern Horizon style set a few years down the line. Um, yeah, I don't know that I have anything really to add or to say to this. It's just a really good design. So shout outs to you, Astrid with a B.
Yeah, I like the art here, and it's showing this horse warrior. You know, it looks like a minotaur almost, but it is definitely a horse. Got the horse mouth and the big bulging muscles. An anthropomorphic horse, I guess. But the yeah, it I always part of me chuckles, you know, when we see these cards that are refs of older cards. Like I know Colossal Dreadmaw is oftentimes a card that the custom card community always tries to make their own riff on that. And the swamps to mountains, yeah, that you know that is absolutely fine. I would run this in my mono red or red green aggressive deck. So yeah, nice job.
Okay. And just as a note, this is probably going to be our last round of talking about other cards before we move into talking about our own designs. So, just with that in mind, make sure to queue up whatever last card you want. So, mine is going to be Left to Witness from the MSC file. Um, this is designed by gynoidpoet. Um, and I think this design is pretty fantastic. Its target opponent takes an extra turn after this one. Another target opponent controls that player during that turn. So you basically have to do this in multiplayer. It doesn't work otherwise. Um, and you're essentially giving someone a mindslaver. So this is it's a very political card, and so I like the play pattern of it. Um, but it also feels very like one form of having a nightmare is the waking nightmare of sleep paralysis. Um, and so I feel like this kind of captures another aspect of nightmares that kind of hasn't been explored before. And I think it's just a fun design. I've explored similar stuff in this vein. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't have much else to say about it. It's just a solid design.
Yeah, I'm really a fan of this card. Something I feel like a lot of people have made that design where it's like you take an extra turn after this one, and opponent controls you during it, or opposite. And I feel like that's common, but I've never seen something like this where you of those choices upon different opponents, which makes it I think, a lot more interesting of a political tool because you making opponents make those choices then puts the blame on them, and as a political tool, really changes the dynamic of the card. So I think it's really well done. I think it was an excellent art selection. Wow, and overall, just a great design.
I think it's absolutely on flavor. The worst, honestly, I think the nightmare is when things happen to you and you can't control it, right? So in a bad dream, there's something that is horrible that's happening, and typically in a dream, you don't you can't just stop it. The only way to stop it is to wake up, and so so this is absolutely a situation of I'm at other people's mercy. So I think that is very, very successful.
Okay, Ancestral. What's going to be your last card for the day?
Oh boy. All right, let's see. I just had it here. Let's see if I can find. We're gonna go with a card. I don't know if this would be like the best card, but I thought this was interesting. So in the MSC file, this is Nightmare Phoenix by Grace, and this is 2 black, flying haste. Nightmare Phoenix's power is equal to the number of swamps in your graveyard. Toughness is equal to that number plus 1. Has retrace. I like the retrace part. That's sort of a way to get the Phoenix back. So obviously, if the Phoenix needs to wake up, or sorry, it comes back from the ashes. It's also a good way to get lands into your graveyard. I would assume that black has a lot of self mill, so this would be a situation where you would absolutely want to discard your swamps there. I would assume that this is still another homage to the original Nightmare card, and it also kind of feels. It almost feels like a Goyf as well. It's got the 1+ for the toughness, and matters with the cards in the graveyard. So whether that was intentional or not, I think lots of little things here and there, but I haven't really seen any takes on like the recurring reawakening nightmare, and so I thought this was kind of clever.
Yeah, at first when I saw this, I'm like, wow, this is just strictly better old Nightmare. This is kind of broken. And then I noticed, oh, number of swamp cards in your graveyard, which you can also do kind of dummy broken stuff with that. Lots of ways to self-mill yourself, but it definitely takes a lot more work than just play mono black and play lands. So there's like a dynamic there that I appreciate. And I think retrace. Have we seen a retrace Phoenix before? Because if we haven't, then this is really because if there's one in canon, I can't remember it. But yeah, this is really clever, and I love the way that it's also self-enabling. Um, Maybe a little too much so, not gonna lie.
Mm-hmm.
But I could definitely see like either removing the haste or like giving it 0/0 by default or something like that. Just this definitely feel like maybe I'm a little too worried about it, but the power level on this definitely feels a little cranked up. But I love the concept of it.
Yeah, I'm with you in regards to the power level. I think this is, even if this cost 5 and a black, I think it'd be better than Old Nightmare by a lot, just in terms of the ability of, you have a lot more ability to self mill yourself, get lands into your graveyard through a number of different ways than you do to get them onto the battlefield one a turn. Because, you can mill, discard, you have so many different ways of getting this done, especially when the card itself gives you your own engine to put more swamps into your graveyard. I think the fact, but like, balance aside, I think this is a really excellent design. There are no retrace creatures in canon, so this is a really cool innovation on how to use retrace, and I think it's perfect for a Phoenix. And overall, it feels like a Phoenix with the flying and the haste, and it still feels black with the reliance on swamps and the nightmare flavoring. So it marries really good flavor with cool mechanics and being overtuned, sure, but that's not really. It doesn't really matter because this is an excellent package.
Okay, and gateways. What is going to be your last card for the day?
All right, so my last card, designed by someone else, is going to be Haunting Visions from the MSC file. It'll come up as designed by Provocative, and it is a 2 and a black enchantment. Whenever one or more creatures attack you or a planeswalker you control, for each attacking creature, choose a creature card in your graveyard. The attacking player may pay 2. If they don't, you return that creature to the battlefield blocking, and then it's sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step. I think at first when I saw this, I was like, "Holy shit, this is absurd." I was worried about the power level because being able to loop your dead creatures seemed insane. Being able to bring a creature back, having it block that creature, sacrificing it, and then repeating that process later. I was thinking this is crazy, and then I stepped back and I took a look at it, and I was like, "Hey, this is strictly worse Ghostly Prison." Because it's just pay 2 or don't attack. So I think that it's a really cool design in the multiplayer space of like politics being able to get you creatures back. But other than that, I think it's really cool just on the base level of like, it's this card that looks really powerful and has a lot of like, is really exciting. And when you actually play with it, it's basically just a slightly different, slightly worse, but still relatively powerful version of another card that exists and is still definitely playable and also has a lot more intrigue to it than that card does. So I think I wanted to shout out this card just for being really intriguing and making me think.
Yeah, I also love the potential, like you mentioned, in multiplayer, the politics where it's like, hey, if you attack me with that, can I get back my this thing for value? Because if they're like, let's say both 2/4s or something, and and your creature has an ETB, and they're like, sure, buddy, you can have your 2/4 back and like draw a card and gain 3 life or whatever it does on ETB. And so there's a lot more like play to it than Ghostly Visions or Ghostly Prison. But in the end, it's basically just the version of Propaganda and Ghostly Prison in a offensive sense, or like in the base case of it. And so, yeah, I think it's a very clever way of doing that kind of effect. I'm a fan.
It's not a knock on the card. I think it sort of reminds me of the kind of cards that Wizards was making, like back in the early days, like around Ice Age. You'd have these kind of curious effects where I don't want to say arbitrary, but it almost sometimes it feels like an arbitrary cost during a specific like step during the turn. Uh, and honestly, maybe we need a little bit of that complexity. Like it introduces some interesting gameplay decisions where people are forced to make. I think in a way, black normally shouldn't discourage people from attacking you, but I guess if you think about like No Mercy and some of those cards, which admittedly that's probably a little more broken, this is not totally out of the question. Obviously, the creature that comes back into play has to be sacrificed. Um, so anyways, I enjoy the gameplay pattern, and would really I would be really scared, I think, if my opponent has something scary in their graveyard. Also, I'd be like cautious about some sort of weird like shenanigans, like open mana where like the defender could like immediately sacrifice a creature that's tapped, and then they could bring it back, and block with it.
Yeah, for me personally, you mentioned that it reminded you of a lot of old border cards from the past. For me, what this reminds me of is a lot of the new tools we're getting for white to draw cards. Because like it reminds me of Mangara the Diplomat or the Esper Sentinel, where it looks like these crazy payoffs for getting a super good card draw engine, and then you when you look at it, it's really just like a saying don't do this. And it's the same with like No Mercy. It's the same with a lot of the cards you did mention.
Mhm.
But I think it does a good job of like being a cool signpost, even if it's not as strong as it initially looks.
Okay. Um, and with that, let's move on to the designs that we actually did ourselves this week or this day. I didn't do any today, so I'm going to defer to Ancestral to start us off.
Whoa.
Caillou's doing so much work, so Caillou absolutely gets a pass. The so actually I might have missed one day, not sure. I've actually been my goal has been to make a custom set. So basically by the end of the month here, to have a set that's playable. And it's the I think I'm trying to have a card each day, but the prompts could also be used to not as a specific card, but like as a particular archetype in the set. So like I think the rebirth was a keyword that was going to be used for green white, and what was dream? I can't remember what I chose now. I have to look through my notes. But anyways, mystery was our day 2, I believe. And so I thought it'd be fun to have mystery as a blue black, and it was a keyword. So I've been kind of toying with this, and I'm not sure that the design is anywhere near final, and that's okay, right? We're just making cards. It's not like the card can't ever be edited or modified. So the card's called Wild Nightmare. This is on MTG Design. It might be a very late entry to the MSC, but I don't think it's in the file. But you can certainly find it on the website.
Yep, we got it.
Wild Nightmare is a 3 and a black. a creature nightmare horse, so this is definitely an nod to Nightmare itself. And Wizards has done a few of these lately too. There was one in Theros Beyond Death. There was an escape horse. And there was a Dusk Charger, which was from Ixalan. So this is a 3/3, and it has mystery. So mystery is when this creature enters the battlefield, exile the top card of your library. And whenever a creature dealt damage by Wild Nightmare dies, this turn dies. Turn the exile card face up, and then you have a turn where you can an extra turn where you can play this card. And the idea behind mystery here is that there's a goal. So the goal is, in this case, you want to kill something with the nightmare, and then once the goal is realized, then you get the reward, which is the mystery. So you kind of solve the mystery, if you will. So maybe like a good flavor analogy would be like maybe like a movie where there's this menacing thing, or this evil, right, and the protagonist or a friend of the protagonist dies, but in their death they've discovered the truth behind it. So basically you get to finally look at the card, and you can then cast it. I think it works okay. Obviously the sort of delayed impulse is more of like a red thing. um so could end up tweaking this a little bit, but basically I really like the idea. Have a goal, realize the goal, and get the mysterious reward, if you will.
Yeah, I think this is a really solid design. I enjoyed that, you have that design and mindset in terms of like flavoring it as though it were a mystery movie or some sort of like story, and having each card have its own little story to tell. I think in terms of power level, this seems a little weak. I think this could pretty safely just put the card into your hand. Um, and I feel like something that turns it face up and then plays into the end of your next turn would be a great payoff for like a mystery, a red card that's a mystery as well. But like overall, I think that this is a really sick common design. I think that you have a really good like this has a really good sense of just making a simple common that's clean, that's powerful enough, at least playable, and just overall really solid.
Yeah, I fucks with it pretty much. I don't know that I have much more to say, but um, I think it'll be interesting to see because obviously I know also Ancestral. I don't know if you've talked to Juliet yet, but Juliet is exploring similar space with the reimaginings of Manifest and Hideaway in her Jumpstart remix for Moxtober this year. But yeah, I
Very
think the
nice.
main
Okay.
but I think the main thing is like playing around with this idea of like a hidden space, um, and like different things you can do with it is going to be interesting. And I kind of want I this is one of those things where like I want to see more of the mechanic in the
Hmm.
future to see what you do with it. So just basically, I'm subscribing to the newsletter or whatever. I'm subscribing. That's what my
Yeah,
comment here today is.
sure thing. Thank you.
Okay, uh, and to finish us off, Gateways, tell us about your cards for today.
Right. So should I go into all three? Um,
Yes.
because I have multiple. Okay, cool. So my project this year has been I'm making a rarity list set of multiple entries a day. They're all supposed to be set in the same world, and overall, it's not intended to end up as a draftable set, but it is ended up as intended to end up as a just a rarity list collection of cards that I can show off. One trend that happened a lot this week in terms of nightmares is a lot of people looked at nightmare horses and looked at that card. A lot of people looked at discard effects. I think one type of card that I saw a ton this week was people bringing back the Planeswalker Ashiok.
Mm.
I think I saw at least like 10 of those, and I'm no exception. All three of my cards were based off of Ashiok showing up on the plane that my set is based on, and just kind of being there. Um, because yeah, so my first card I want to talk about is Ashiok's Wisdom, that'll show up as designed by Gateway 7. Ashiok's Wisdom is a divination variant. It's 2 and a blue for a sorcery. When Ashiok's Wisdom is put into your graveyard from your library, you scry 2, and then you draw 2 cards as the effect of the card. So it's basically a Narcomoeba variant where instead of getting a 1/1 or pinging your opponent for 3 with like Creeping Chill, it's a scry effect. I think that it's something that's going to be more valuable than Creeping Chill in terms of a fair deck that wants to use it, in terms of just getting some value off with it, and it's going to be a lot less powerful than the other 2, Narcomoeba and Creeping Chill. It's going to be less powerful than those 2 in a combo deck that wants to put this in your graveyard, because scry isn't really something you can, if you flip 4 scry cards, you've only scryed. You're not really doing as much as you could have if it was a 1/1 flyer or it was direct damage. So I think it's just a neat divination variant that has some depth to it, and I enjoy it.
Yeah, I've windmill slammed this into the Moxtober cube set file because there are a lot of cards already that play around with milling. Not just from today, there's definitely a lot from Nightmare, but just like all of the days, just surveilling, milling is just a common thing, like effect these days. And so I think that as a common plus, or like as like a side graded common, this does a lot of cool stuff for limited environments. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
simple and
I think
effective.
definitely. Yeah, I think because of the fact that a lot of these prompts are leaning way more towards the darker themes. We have nightmare, plot, pawn, all these sorts of different things. I think we're getting a lot more of effects that people might be considered, more black. Like I feel like cards are just kind of leaning towards the black end of the spectrum, and this is kind of like an example of that.
I think this works great as sort of a. I think most people will agree that your divination card is just like a little too expensive, or just not quite as good. But obviously, draw 3 cards for 3 would be a little crazy, which I attempted the other day in the dream uh, prompt. But I think this sort of gives it sort of bridges the gap, right? It's draw 2 with a plus, and certainly if you can scry 2 before you draw 2, it's honestly almost as powerful as drawing 3 cards, because you get to look at up to 4 cards basically and choose the best 2. It's not always going to work that way, but so I think this is a very good, very uh, clean card, and I could totally see choosing this if I was drafting or playing a cube.
All right, so looking at my next card, Fears Made Manifest, also in the MSC file. It's a 2/black creature nightmare for 3/1. It has flying. Whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, they exile a card from their hand at random. For as long as it remains exiled, you may play it, and you may spend mana as though it were any color to do so. So my thoughts in designing this, something I mentioned earlier. I'm a big fan of random discard. I think that it ends up um, maybe if it's not the most spiky thing, it's just an enjoyable sort of way to affect the game in a disruptive way. And I think one of the cards that I enjoy that does that is Hypnotic Spectre. And when we brought up Nightmare, and when I started thinking of Ashiok, my brain immediately went to like how to flavor people forgetting things, how to flavor sort of like that mental attack. And Hypnotic Spectre is the first place I went. So I wanted to do a riff on that, and I ended up at a card definitely more expensive with a little more power, but able to cast the things that you force your opponent to discard, to really like drive home mechanically that sense of like taking something from your opponent that they uh, that you can use their things against them in a nightmare way, and then sort of like flavoring those things as their fears and having the card use that against them. So I tried to marry those sorts of elements together.
This is really awesome. I think I love how you can like take something and steal it, and then have it turn against you. I love the chaotic nature. So I think just the chaos of what are they going to get? I don't get to choose, and whatever they do get, I can't stop them from from them using it. Basically, it's it's coming back to haunt me. So this is a lot of fun. This is fantastic.
Yeah, I fucks with it. I still hate you for random discard. Not gonna lie, lame
Well,
as shit.
off my jorts, loser.
But yeah, overall, yeah, I don't know that I have much to add other than what Ancestral said. So go
Yeah, all
next.
right,
Go
and then
next.
yeah. So my final card of the day was Ashiok of Eerie Dreams. It's 3 blue and a black for a planeswalker. Or oh my god, oh I typed this as legendary creature. Oh that's so cringe. Ah, shit.
We can fix it
Well,
later.
yeah. It's no biggie. I just realized now. So it has the passive. You may play cards exiled with Ashiok, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to do so. The +1, target opponent exiles a card from their hand and the top card of their library, and the -2 is, I think, the most interesting ability here. Exile target creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the end of turn. So one thing I love about Planeswalker design is you can create abilities that have a lot of different use cases, and when you put those in conjunction together, you have this really cool like Goldberg machine of different things you can interact with in different ways you can do it. And I think my -2 tried to do that because there are a couple of different ways that you can do it. You can -2 something to exile your own creature just to blink it normally, or the more interesting use case, the turn after you play this, you can -2 a creature an opponent controls and then cast it with your mana on that turn. And then the return to the battlefield won't trigger at all. And also, if you wanted to trigger your own card's cast triggers, you could just -2 your own creature and then cast it. So I think there are a lot of weird things you can do with this sort of design. I think that I had a lot of fun putting it together just because of this how this ability interacts with the rest of the card and how it's not just going to, and because of the fact that it's you have to be able to cast the creature to for it to function as removal. This isn't the kind of planeswalker that can just auto protect itself and then go on to control the game from there. So I had a lot of fun designing this. One thing I do want to note is that another design, if you'll scroll 2 cards down, get Ashiok Awoken. Ashiok Awoken is basically the exact same card with the exact same art. It's I have no idea who MV Tree is, the designer of that card, but we
MB3
somehow
is
converged
a,
the
a
design.
newish user on the custom Magic Discord. I think they joined maybe like 2 months ago, but they're fairly active at
Wow.
the time.
Okay, yeah. Never met him, but I just think it's crazy how similar these designs are. Same mana cost, same art, same passive. +1 exiles a card from the top of opponent's library. -2 exiles something else, and then they have an ultimate. I don't, but I thought it was really amusing to see how how convergent those two designs were. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think it just kind of goes to show how strong Ashiok's like general mechanical and actual flavor is. It that they just kind of came together that way. Ashiok is all about exiling, all about casting from exile, and making you do the card advantaging for them. So
The +1 seems the I guess the ability seems strong in that you're basically the opponent is discarding a card and I guess you're almost drawing 2 cards in a way. I mean, I totally get you have to have, it's dependent on having Ashiok in the battlefield and whatnot, but it's almost like they discard a card and you draw 2, but it certainly fits in with exactly what Ashiok does. The uh the -2, I guess, is that designed, like, let me ask you, was that designed for like sort of flickering your own things, or what's the idea behind that?
yeah. So I think my design process was I started at just like exile target creature, and I looked at that and I was like, that's really boring. How can I? What kinds of exile effects can I do that would make this play more interestingly? So I did an Oracle search for exile, and the first thing I saw was like a blink spell, and I was like, wait a minute, if I blink spell something, um, you can like cast it through his own passive or their own passive, which I thought was really cool. So it definitely, the intent of it is to be able to cast your opponent's creatures. But like I wanted to keep the option there to do stuff to your own creatures, even cast your own creatures if necessary, because I think that one of the biggest boons of Planeswalker design is like keep as many routes as you can open. Like don't cut off, don't be super specific and cut off something from happening. Um, like for instance, if this had said like exile target creature and opponent controls, I think it would just be a weaker design because there's just so many less tricks that you can do with it. But to answer your question, yeah, it was definitely intended as primarily using to exile your opponent's creatures.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense now that you mentioned that. I obviously my head wasn't in that space of I can cast it the moment it is exiled. I guess the idea is if you didn't have the mana, I'm trying to figure out if there would be a situation where you would I guess you might flicker on things. I guess that would be the situation where you wouldn't want to cast it.
Yeah. Um, I one thing I also want to mention is I think that part of the balance of that design and also like the +1 as well is that Ashiok has to be on the field to make everything happen. Like especially in regards to what you said about the +1 drawing you 2 cards. Like absolutely I agree. I think it's a really strong planeswalker, a pretty strong planeswalker, but the balancing point there is you if you play Ashiok and then you +1, you're out of mana for the turn. Your opponent swings out, kills Ashiok, and those 2 cards that you had are gone to the wind. So I think that there's a balancing point there that I tried to make happen. I don't know if it fully balances the card, but yeah, I know I posted it in the Discord server. A lot of people, someone had mentioned concerns about not being able to protect itself at all, and someone else was saying it was too powerful. So hopefully it's in a middle ground. Who knows?
I think it's fine compared to like, well, what like even the 5 mana Ashiok from the reason Theros said like it could make creatures to protect itself. It had removal. Like that thing was an absolute monster, and it's like saw play in standard control decks, but it wasn't like there were also like other like obviously like Dream Trawler was running around. You had the 4 mana Pegasus. There's obviously Elspeth Conqueror's Death. There was a lot more going on. So I think that like this thing doesn't even have a way to protect itself on the turn it comes down. I think it's eminently fine.
But yeah, as like an overall thought on my Ashiok entry, I thought I had a lot of fun making the cards for it. I had a lot of fun, Ashiok is my favorite planeswalker in Magic the Gathering history. Um, in no small part to the fact that I'm very horny for them. But I think Ashiok's a really cool character, and I had a lot of fun designing the cards.
Okay, cool. And once again, thanks for joining us on such short notice. This was super cool.
Yeah, of course.
And thank you for joining us as always, Ancestral. It's always a joy to have you. Um, and we're going to move to the shout out section of the show. Thanks for Ancestral for putting together the MTG.design stuff to make this possible. Thanks to Cajun for putting together LackeyBot stuff so we can get cards into the MSC file and grab cards from Discord. And then thanks to everyone who's been submitting cards. It's been super great. Once again, you can find all of the links to that in the description. You can also find instructions on how you can submit your own cards for consideration here. And also, yeah, we have the artists for any non-card art shown, which is basically just the foreground and background art here. That's also in the description. But yeah, other than that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow. Until then, this is Caillou signing off.